Hmm. Well, in light of today and after your years of experience, what are your thoughts today? Do you have any? What is your idea? What do you think these things were?
Well, I have since come to the conclusion that they are extraterrestrial. They're in our skies all the time, at will. They're not from one area, they're from many areas. Mm-hmm. And it appears as though there are, Eisenhower had 2 visits and flew out to make contact with them. It's on record. Mm-hmm. Anybody can look it up. And the first group that he met offered him a cure for all, as I would say it, a cure for diseases.
Whoa.
And the second group, not at the same time, but within a certain short time, offered him military benefits and etc. These were the Greys. I never have found out really who the other group was.
Now, did you learn this through study, or did you hear this from people within?
I've read books about it.
Mm-hmm. I see. But in 1952, you actually saw them with your own eyes.
Yes.
Okay. And, of course, the official explanation at that time was that it was just temperature inversion, different inversions of temperatures causing lights to reflect down. That does not jive with what you saw, does it?
Absolutely not. I am blessed, or I was blessed, with 20/10 vision and know what I see.
Exactly. You know what you see. All right, Colonel Paul, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and thank you for sharing your story with our audience. I'm sure they find that very, very interesting and very, very revealing. And, of course, it fits in perfectly with many other accounts from that period of time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go to a break here?
I would like to see the U.S. come clean and say, hey, we tried to handle this, but there is no answer to it. Here's what it is.
Right. Do you, in your mind, is there any reason to believe that these ETs are hostile?
I've never had. I have other not contact, but indications of non-hostility by them.
Okay. All right. So in other words, we just get a visit from the neighbors, and our first response was to order military jets to shoot them down. They later rescinded that, of course, but I guess that kind of paints a picture of where we are. Yep. We're not very good neighbors, are we?
Not very good neighbors, no. Come clean, start all over.
There we go. I'm with you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay. That was an 84-year-old retired intelligence analyst who worked in the D.C. area and had served the intelligence community for more than 30 years. And now he has decided that it's time to try to alert people to the reality of what's going on. And, of course, here speaking to an epic audience, he's probably could be accused of preaching to the choir. But to carry this on forward is going to require the rest of us doing our part. the accounts of UFOs just continued to go on and on. Following the events in Washington back in 1952, even some of the official investigations regarding UFOs were calling for an end to the official secrecy. As early as April 1952, Navy Secretary Dan Kimball had his own UFO experience while flying to Hawaii. He said that two dish-shaped crafts flying at speeds estimated at more than 1,500 miles an hour, which, believe me, folks, was impossible for jets of that era, zoomed and circled his executive plane and another plane carrying Admiral Arthur Radford. Upon landing, Kimball radioed the Air Force with a report of what he had seen, and sometime later he was outraged to learn that not only had the Air Force apparently not seriously investigated his case, but would not even release to him what analysis they did prepare. And this is the Secretary of the Navy. And so he ordered the Navy to begin its own investigation, and part of that resulted in a very famous incident also in 1952 when a chief warrant officer named Delbert Newhouse was in Utah, just north of Salt Lake City, and they saw a group of 12 to 14 bright, shiny objects maneuvering in formation at high speed, and he, being a Navy photographer for 21 years, grabbed his film camera, set the turret at the 3-inch telephoto lens, and exposed about 40 feet of film before these objects flew out of sight. This time the film went not to the Air Force, but to the Navy Photo Interpretation Laboratory near Washington. And the analysts there quickly ruled out aircraft, balloons, birds, and their final conclusion was unknown objects under intelligent control. One of the best and most well-documented of the early UFO accounts. Well, we're coming up to the midpoint here, and I think it's about time that we take a break, and we'll consider Paul's story, and then coming back with any luck, we're going to hear from another eyewitness of the 1952 UFOs over Washington. And I'm warning everyone, we've got here in Texas some thunderstorm activity coming in with lightning and thunder. And so if for some reason I'm gone away, I have not been abducted, probably. I have probably been the victim of electrical outage due to thunderstorms, but let's keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully that's not going to happen. And I want all of you to, if you have people interested in UFOs, why don't you, here's an opportunity while we take a break to call them, send them an email, Twitter them, whatever, and let them know that we've got some very outstanding material that we're presenting tonight on some of these early UFO incidents in U.S. history, and encourage them to come listen in. So we will be back right after these messages. Howdy, here we are on Epic Voyages again. Epic Voyagers, we're all Voyagers in this epic adventure. And for those of you who may not be that familiar with EPIC, that stands for the Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council. Whoa, I guess that makes us all council members now. Well, last segment, we talked with the 84-year-old intelligence analyst, Paul. And I apologize, I think I started off calling him Colonel Paul. And you'll find out why my mix-up on this section, because now we're going to go to Vivian Walker, who is a newly named State Director for EPIC for the state of Louisiana and a senior investigator. And Vivian, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I know you've had some experience in this field before because you previously worked for another UFO investigation unit organization, correct?
Yeah, I was the state director for them.
Okay, so you're not just jumping into this as a babe in the woods, as they say.
No.
Well,
no, I'm not.
Well, obviously, if you were a witness to the 1952 events over Washington, D.C., let's just go all the way back to there. And according to my notes here, you were living on 63rd Avenue, which is a street running north and south in Cheverly, Maryland.
Cheverly.
Cheverly, as in Chevrolet,
yes.
But it's Cheverly. Yeah,
Cheverly,
Maryland. And that's 7 miles northeast of D.C., right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's just start from there. You were a young girl, but you were not a babe in arms.
No.
You certainly knew what was going on in the environment around you. So let's go to that evening on July the 26th. And according to all the reports, and you got it right, you said you believed it was about 6 or 7 o'clock, and I think 6 p.m. is pretty much what they've nailed. Tell us your
I knew it was around that time only because I had to put it into the same time frame with when we went to bed, and we were always sent to bed rather early because, in the summer I remember looking out the window and the kids would be playing outside and we were already in our beds. So I knew it was, early in the evening.
Yeah, it sounded like you had some strict parents like I did.
Yeah.
And keep in mind, folks, at this time there really wasn't any television. And so really, when we started getting sundown, it was about time to go to bed.
Actually, we had TV.
You did? Well,
yeah.
you were ahead of us here in Texas.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was about bedtime, but you weren't in bed, were you?
No.
Okay.
I wasn't even in my pajamas. It was one of those rare times that we were allowed to be outside, after dinner. And normally, right after dinner, we would have taken a bath and then gone to bed shortly afterwards.
That would have been during school days, right? This is the summer.
This was any time. Any time.
Any time. Okay.
Right. At that point, I was the oldest of 5 children. My parents later had another one, so I'm the oldest of 6. But when you've got 5 kids, you want to get them to bed early. So.
Right.
I think that was the thinking behind that. But I'm not real sure why we were allowed to stay up a little bit later, and why we weren't already, up in the bathtub. But we were outside. The entire neighborhood was out there. And we were all looking down the street or up the street. To me it seemed like it was down the street because there was a hill down at the end. But we were, the whole neighborhood was out looking at these UFOs that were flying around up there. And there were about 7 of them, and as near as I can recall, I just remember seeing them kind of flying initially in a group, and then there were 2 of them that kind of moved off a little bit, and then back in again, and it was just, I didn't really fully comprehend why everybody was afraid, and everybody was so concerned about it, and then my father, who was extremely concerned, he went inside the house. He had just made lieutenant colonel 5 days prior to this incident, and he was stationed at Andrews Air Force Base, and he was also working out of the Pentagon. And he went in the house to call the Pentagon, and when he came out, he was just stone-faced. I mean, I can still see the look on his face. And I remember thinking that it had to be top secret because I knew he had top secret security clearance. And I just assumed it was something top secret, and that's why he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. And so, the event didn't last that long for me because we were eventually, sent inside the house to take a bath and go to bed.
Were the objects still in the sky when you were sitting into the house, or had they gone home?
As I recall, everybody was still out there looking at them when I was sent in the house. And,
and can you describe what you saw? I mean, was it like
they were silver discs? They were silver disc, and you could see the sunlight reflecting off of them.
Solid objects.
Yeah.
Okay. And they were coming, I believe here in the notes said they were coming in a southwesterly direction. So
yeah.
Probably like Paul, before you, they had already passed over Washington and were heading away from Washington, correct?
I'm not really sure. I'm kind of, after all these years, I'm a little turned around on the direction. But
well, you said Chevrolet. You said Chevrolet was northeast of Washington, and so in your notes they say they were flying southwesterly, which would have been away from Washington, right?
Right.
Okay, probably, maybe. We'll give that a definite maybe. Hey, a little water has gone under the bridge since 1952, hasn't it, Vivian?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, so that actually was your experience. Was there ever any your thought then or now that maybe it was some sort of natural phenomena?
No. And one of the things that about, somewhere between 15 and 20 years ago, I was here visiting my dad, and I was living in California at the time. And we were sitting at his kitchen table, and we were talking about UFOs and stuff. And I said, well, what was the whole deal when you went in and called the Pentagon in 1952 when, they were flying over? And he started laughing, and he said the reason that he was so stone-faced when he came back out is because he was just livid. Because when he went in and called the Pentagon, they treated him like a nut job. Now, you have to keep in mind that my dad was an experienced World War II pilot. He was also the first pilot to fly into Orly, France after D-Day. He flew General Lee in to meet with General de Gaulle. And, so he was no dummy when it came to aeronautics. And so he was so infuriated by the fact that they treated him like a nut job that's why he wouldn't talk to anybody about it. It had nothing to do with anything being top secret.
Wow. So, in other words, he got the same brush off that earlier Paul said he did when, as an experienced intelligence analyst, he tried to tell him what was going on. And, of course, I do understand that at the time, the switchboards, the newspapers, the police were just inundated with calls from people, saying, here's what I saw, or what is it, right?
Yeah. I think, back then a lot of people were really scared, I think it was too soon after War of the Worlds. I think people thought we were being invaded, and, so that's understandable why at that time people were doing that.
That's a very good point, Vivian, because, today, Orson Welles' War of the Worlds, that sounds like ancient history, but in 1952, that was less than 15 years after. That was like, like somebody talking about 9/11 now. It was still very fresh in a lot of people's minds.
Well, and there were a lot of people that caused so much panic. There were people that committed suicide even. And there were people that took guns and stuff and went off into the hills to hide out. And, people thought it was real. They thought all this was real. And so, it was, and this was when, in the late 40s when Orson Welles did that?
No, actually about 1930. 38.
Oh, I was thinking it was in the 40s. But anyway, it was...
38. But still, see, that would have been like 14 years. Yeah,
so people were still, in that panic mode. And you could see that... just by looking at the people up and down my street, if you look at that street now, I've gone to V Pike and looked at it, and there's big trees on it in everybody's front yard. Well, when we lived there were no trees at all in anybody's yard. We had woods behind us, but we had a very clear view of what was going on.
Right. Well, another thing I might add here is that 1952 was only 7 years after World War II ended. And the nation was still very much in a war security mind frame.
Oh, yeah, we used to have drills where we'd have to, get under the desk, and, they'd have the alarms go off, and everybody in the school would have to get under the desk. They were, in case somebody was going to come bomb us. And people were still in that mindset.
We did that also in Texas, and of course, let me remind the younger listeners, This was right after, several years after Winston Churchill had declared an Iron Curtain in Europe, and we were already being conditioned to be fearful of the Russian communists in World War III. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the Cold War went on for a good number of years, and this was the beginning of it, but this was also the beginning of the McCarthy era. Paranoia runs deep, and right. You have to put that into the context of what was going on at that time. Since then, Vivian, I know you've studied the phenomena and you've gone out as an investigator for now at least two UFO investigation organizations, and I'm sure that you've seen the arguments that what everyone saw over Washington was actually just lights reflected off of temperature inversions, just different levels of the atmosphere.
Oh, that's such baloney.
Yeah, absolutely, because, I think it was only, maybe it was a year before that, the Lubbock lights that took place in 1951, about a year earlier. I went out there to work on the newspaper at the Lubbock Avalanche Journal back in the mid-'60s, and one of the old photographers there had been a photographer for the Lubbock newspaper in the early 1950s. In fact, had taken pictures of what became known as the Lubbock Lights, which was a series of glowing objects in a V-shaped formation that passed slowly over the town of Lubbock, Texas, way out in West Texas. And I remember asking him one time, I said, well, the government said it was just street lights shining off the underside of a flight of plovers, which is a kind of duck. And he said, yeah, they said it was duck butts. Right. He never bought that, and he actually saw them and took photographs of them. So they really handed us a bunch of dissembling disinformation over the years, haven't they, Vivian?
They really have, and it's really insulting to people's intelligence, for the government to come off with these ridiculous stories. Some of us have seen things that we know